What's up, everybody? Thanks as always for supporting the show. It would mean a lot to me if you would take a second to scroll down and hit that subscribe button to the Hoops Tonight YouTube channel, and then follow me on social media on TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter so you guys don't miss any of our content over the course of this season. All right, let's talk some basketball. Now, the question is, because one of the things that I've talked about is like, I actually view Jonathan Kuminga as one of the most enticing young players around the league. And so what becomes tricky is you've got this group of young players, Jonathan Kuminga, Moses Moody, Trayce Jackson-Davis, and Brandon Podziemski. And essentially, if you are going to try, you and I have talked about this on other platforms and over text as well, this idea of like what archetype should they target? And so I want to kind of approach this from two fronts. So let's start with the archetype. What type of player do you think rounds out a core five with Golden State that could be the group you go down with in the Western Conference Finals?
It's got to be a front court player, and it needs to be a two-way front court player for the most part. There's some leeway there, but like we go back to the Draymond and Looney thing doesn't work anymore. Okay, they honestly got more mileage out of it than I think anyone thought they could. But the reality is you need to stagger those guys. And the way Looney's playing, like, he might not be in the rotation in the playoffs. I kind of think he'll come around in some capacity. But anyway, it's a different conversation. You can go back and watch the Lakers series. If they had another 4-5, they beat the Lakers. But the Lakers knew they had no one to put at that combo, made it easy for Anthony Davis to just wreak havoc on them, and they just couldn't score enough. That's what it comes down to. So I'm not saying it's easy to find that guy, but like we've seen the names floated, Pascal Siakam, Lauri Markkanen, potentially available at the deadline. They're not perfect fits, but both of those guys would significantly raise the ceiling of this team, and those are the type of players they should be pursuing.
Yeah, it's interesting because like last year, that was literally what they were doing. It's like, let's try Gary Payton. Let's try JaMychal Green. Yeah. They were just trying to, it was like, who's going to be this guy that we can use? Yeah, there was always one flaw in one of those players that made it just not work. And it's like, there aren't enough JaMychal Green pick and pop threes that he could make to justify all of the other elements of the game, right? And Siakam's the guy that I keep coming back to because I 100% agree. Like Steph and Klay, I'm going down with Steph and Klay. Like I'm sorry, I'm going down with Steph and Klay. Whether or not it's Wiggins or Kuminga at the three, that's a decision for another day, and we're going to talk about that here in just a second. But to me, it's Draymond at the 5, Steph and Klay at the 1-2, and then one of those athletic forwards, and then another type of player in that archetype. And that's why I keep coming back to Siakam, because one of the things that the Warriors have always been very good at is like, even when Steph Curry ends up on switches, they're able to scram him out of it or or they'll try to hedge and recover to keep him out of the switches. Or even when he gets on the switch, they provide excellent backside help and give him a job that he can do pressing up. And like Klay Thompson holds up excellent on switches. Whoever that forward is, Wiggins or Kuminga would hold up. Draymond, Pascal Siakam. That to me is where Exactly. And I start to look at that group of 5 as like, okay, this is something where if I'm Denver and I'm sitting game planning for the series, I'm like, shit, what do we do about this? Like, this is going to be somewhat of a problem. So, but here's where it gets complicated, because that Wiggins Kuminga piece there is going to be the challenge. Because if I'm Toronto, I'm like, sure, yeah, you can have Pascal, but Jonathan's coming. You know what I mean? Like, that's what they're going to say. So out of the Jonathan Kuminga, Moses Moody, Trayce Jackson-Davis, Brandon Podziemski crew, who do you view in that crew as like indispensable versus like, I would be willing to trade for an upgrade for a short window run with
Steph? This is going to be funny. Brandon Podziemski is the only one I really struggle to trade. Just given the fact that he's a 20-year-old rookie and clearly better than all the other players, even though he doesn't play the position you want. He's a combo guard. He's got good size for a point guard, a little undersized for a 2. But you just watch him play. He actually represents a potential building block for them in a lot of different ways. The passing, the shooting, the defense. He's like a weird hybrid of Jalen Brunson and Caruso at times. Very interesting player. It would hurt to trade him is where I'm at with it. And I would be tempted to say no. Kuminga would be number 2. I would be willing to part with him if you got a Pascal Siakam or a Lauri Markkanen, because essentially they'd be taking his spot at power forward in general. And the assumption would be if you're making that trade, you're keeping said player. You're not trading for a 3-month rental of Siakam and then letting him walk. So it would hurt because at some point Kuminga will be a better player than Siakam. But if you're thinking about the next 3 years, he won't be. He just won't be. And then Moses Moody, he's a good player, but he's just kind of always the odd man out. I don't want to say he's a replaceable 3-and-D player because every team needs those guys, but be willing to give them up if needed to entice a team. I just don't know that he's enough of a sweetener to pull off a deal. To your point, anyone wanting to make a trade with the Warriors is going to want future draft picks where they're betting against the war. They're betting that Steph will eventually get old and they don't have anything else. And then they want Kuminga because he's the most obvious. Like, I could see this guy being like Jaylen Brown level all-star one day. I could see him being a guy that, we can build around. Like, he's not going to be your first option. He's not going to be Kawhi Leonard, which some people thought like there was a chance he could be coming out of the draft, but he is an effective two-way wing, and you can never have too many of those.
Yeah, I think he has the highest potential out of that group. But I also think he's very clearly the guy that has the more bizarre basketball fit within the Warriors system in terms of just like their 5-out read and react type of stuff. Like, he, to me, is going to be a very good player for a long time in the NBA for somebody. And like some of this with fans, like you almost gotta like understand because a lot of them will be like, we can't afford to give up Kuminga. We can't afford to give up Kuminga. And it's like, I totally get that. You don't think the Clippers, when they gave away Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, were like, that dude's going to go be amazing for OKC? They knew it. Of course they did. They had him in building for all those years. They saw his work ethic.
Or like
they saw
Ingram,
what he was doing,
Or like Ingram for Anthony Davis. Ingram was very clearly going to be a good player. But, you kind of have to do that deal, right?
Timeline and fit. And like that's my thing, is like, it's really this simple. You mentioned Steph being at that level still, and I 100% agree. 28 points per game, 65% true shooting. That, when you have that in-house and you have the guy that can stare Jason Tatum in the face and out-execute him down the stretch of a big game, when you have a guy at that caliber, it's just such a rare thing to have around the league. And every team that wins the title, if you hoist the trophy, you got one of those guys. It's like an extreme rarity if you don't, right? And even then, it's like we're looking at the Spurs with like Duncan, who used to be that guy, right? So like, you have to have that guy. That's the foundational piece. You also have the means with which to put next to him a legitimate number 2 like Pascal Siakam, which then all of a sudden slots all these other guys into very achievable roles. And so the way you have to look at it is, it's like, is Kuminga going to be better than Pascal Siakam in 2-3 years? Probably, yeah. Like, probably. Like, that's certainly something that he can do.
At some point,
be the least bit surprised.
One day, Siakam will be 34 and he'll be 25. Math just tends to work out in his favor that way. Yeah,
exactly. But it's just a simple question of like to Toronto, they're in a different timeline. They're thinking Scotty Barnes. They're thinking, okay, what if we add a big athletic forward next to Scotty Barnes? Let's see what he's got. Let's see if there's a fit there. Siakam, we might have to extend on this long-term deal. May not fit the timeline as well. Or you're the Golden State, and it's like Jonathan Kuminga can be really good, but Steph's 35. Klay is starting to see some signs of slowing down. We got to do something here to try to reconfigure this thing. It's just a no-brainer that like you might have to consider a swap where you get rid of one of those guys. To the fit point, Podziemski, I 100% agree with you, because like, I look at him as a guy that's like such an obvious natural fit in the Warriors system. You mentioned his strength.
If he's going to actually be that good of a point of attack defender, which like he's blowing me away as a rookie. I'm not saying you want him guarding Jamal Murray or someone in a playoff series per se, but like if he's this good now, imagine what he could be in a year's time. That also allows you to slot Klay at small forward significantly easier, where he's kind of better guarding strength than quickness anyway at this stage of his career. So
that slotting piece is the big one there. And like, that's where if you get a Siakam and like, let's say you do, one of the other things too is like, we have to factor in that if you trade Jonathan Kuminga and you bring in Pascal Siakam, that may very well end up freeing up rotation minutes for Wiggins to have a larger berth for him to try to figure things out. Because right now, like, I look at Siakam as a guy who can also play the same role that Saric is playing on this team, like as essentially an anchor front court player for their bench units too. And like in general, when you start to build lineups, you can keep a Podziemski in point of attack roles that are achievable for him with his level of athleticism. I'm 100% with you on that one. And again, Moody's obviously one of the more expendable appearing players in that group. It's just, to your point, he's not a sweetener. There's no team around the league that's like, man, I need Moses Moody on my roster. They're like, if we took him in a deal, we'd be happy with him.
You'd be hoping maybe if you throw him in, you don't have to include an extra pick, right? So then you're not as worried about when everyone gets old or something to that effect. I mean, the more you talk through it, like, it's obvious. The other thing Siakam has working to his benefit is he's 29. So really, if you feel confident for the next 3 years, he can be productive for you. That's probably the max amount of time you're going to get out of Steph and Klay. I mean, Steph could just continue to defy the odds, but you kind of have to take these in like 2 to 3 year increments at this stage, right? Makes sense. He's younger. He can carry more of a load for you and help you preserve Steph, because end of the day, when you get to like serious playoff basketball, you're going to need like the best version of Steph to show up.
Well, one of the things that Siakam brings to the table, too, that the Warriors never really had is he brings a guy that you can start using for an alternative method of offensive attack. And what I mean by that is, like, you know, Wiggins was a guy that teams would live with attacking matchups, and he'd get his 18 to 20 doing that, but it wasn't something that they could like really depend on in late game situations. Now imagine a situation where Siakam has to be guarded by a bigger forward and Steph is guarded by a quicker point of attack defender, and you now open up a 2-man game there where you can now, you know, throw the ball down to the block to Pascal Siakam, and he's been one of the most effective post players in the league this year, attacking matchups. It gives you just a different look because, again, you mentioned the Lakers series. That was a big part of it. It wasn't just the fact that they didn't have 5-man groupings that could thrive around Steph and pick and roll. It was also that it just had to be Steph pick and roll every time. They didn't have another action they could run that could dependably generate quality shots. And so to me, like, Siakam is that guy too, where like I think the Warriors might value him a little higher than some of the other teams out there who might be targeting bigger fish, like a Lauri Markkanen, like a OG Anunoby. I think is someone that some teams will probably view as a better player than Siakam. So like Siakam, I think, is an achievable goal as well. And I think that goes a long way towards like making it more
one
tenable.
of the Warriors' other big issues is shot creation. It's kind of, they move the ball. They get a lot of mileage out of guys who can't create their own shot. And then, you know, it inevitably turns into Steph save us offense. It would be nice to have another player who, to your point, you can throw the ball to and just, you know, let him score on the post, let him go 1-on-1 from the mid post. The things we see him do at Toronto. I mean, he addresses a lot of their needs. Yeah, he's a bad 3-point shooter. It'd be nice if he could do that too. But if he did all the things he did and shot 40% from 3, then you're talking about like Kevin Durant light type of stuff. And so you can't have it all. I think overall more positives than negatives.
Siakam's also having one of his better defensive seasons in recent years, and he's like a legitimate weapon, a guy that has tons of big game experience.
That's the part we didn't even really talk about. Like, he's a seamless fit to their defense. You can just plug him in. Put him next to Draymond. Wiggins gets back to himself as the small forward. Klay. That resembles kind of the Dynasty Warriors teams with the switching and the versatility defensively that they've gotten away from just by virtue of the personnel they're playing right now.
And again, I would just put Wiggins back into the starting lineup if that happened. And I'd be like, I know that with Steph, Klay, Siakam, and Draymond, we're still going to win a lot of games. And even if Wiggins isn't playing well, and just, you're basically taking a bet that he's going to get it together.
The shot will eventually fall. Eventually.
Yeah, exactly. And then trickle down into some other things.